Picture this: a wedding reception, 200 guests, champagne glasses raised, the band playing softly in the background, and then, in one swift motion, the groom walks across the marble floor, stands face to face with his new mother-in-law, and slaps her so hard the sound echoes through the entire ballroom. Screams erupt, phones start recording, the bride collapses. But here's what nobody knew in that moment. That slap wasn't random. It wasn't anger. It was 23 years of buried truth exploding in a single devastating second. What you're about to hear is not fiction. This is a real story that unfolded in Charleston, South Carolina, in the spring of 2023. A story that started with what should have been the happiest day of two people's lives and ended with police cars, courtroom battles, and a family torn apart by a secret so shocking that when it finally came out, nobody could believe what they were hearing. This is about Michael, a 32-year-old software engineer, Rebecca, his 29-year-old bride, a pediatric nurse with a smile that could light up a room, and Patricia, Rebecca's mother, a real estate mogul who controlled everything and everyone around her with an iron fist wrapped in expensive silk. The question everyone asked after that slap was simple. Why? Why would a groom, on his wedding day, in front of everyone he loved, commit an act that would get him arrested, humiliated, and plastered across every news outlet in the state? The answer is something nobody saw coming. Not the guests, not the police, not even Rebecca herself. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end of this one, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Michael Hayes grew up in a small town outside of Savannah, Georgia. His childhood wasn't picture perfect, but it was stable. Raised by his aunt and uncle after his parents died in a car accident when he was just 3 years old, Michael never really asked questions about his past. His Aunt Linda told him what he needed to know. His parents loved him. They died too soon, and she and his Uncle Robert would make sure he had everything he needed. And they did. Michael went to college on a scholarship, graduated with honors, and landed a great job in Charleston. He was kind, hard-working, and the type of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. That's what Rebecca loved about him when they met at a hospital fundraiser in 2021. She was setting up donation tables. He was there representing his company. Their eyes met across the room, and as cliché as it sounds, something just clicked. They talked for hours that night, about everything, their dreams, their fears, the little things that made them laugh. Rebecca told him about growing up with a single mother who built a real estate empire from nothing. Michael told her about losing his parents young and being raised by family who loved him unconditionally. 6 months later, they moved in together. A year after that, Michael proposed on a beach in Hilton Head at sunset with a ring he'd saved up for months to buy. Rebecca said yes before he even finished asking. Everything seemed perfect. But there was something Michael didn't know. Something Rebecca herself didn't fully understand yet. Patricia, Rebecca's mother, had been acting strange ever since she met Michael. At first it was subtle. She'd ask odd questions about his childhood. Where exactly did he grow up? What were his parents' names? Did he have any siblings? Michael thought she was just being a protective mom, doing her due diligence. But Rebecca noticed something else. Her mother's hands would tremble slightly whenever Michael talked about his past. Her face would go pale. And once, Rebecca caught her mother staring at a photo of Michael on her phone with tears streaming down her face. When Rebecca asked what was wrong, Patricia snapped at her, told her it was nothing, told her to mind her business. That should have been the first red flag. The engagement period should have been joyful, but it was anything but. Patricia inserted herself into every single decision. The venue, the flowers, the guest list, the menu. She paid for everything, which meant she controlled everything. Rebecca tried to push back a few times, suggesting ideas she and Michael had discussed, but her mother would shut her down with a look that could freeze water. Michael noticed the tension but chalked it up to typical wedding stress and a controlling mother-in-law. He'd heard the stories. He figured he could handle it. 3 months before the wedding, Patricia tried to convince Rebecca to postpone. She said the venue had double booked, which was a lie. Rebecca called and confirmed they were still good to go. 2 months before the wedding, Patricia suggested Rebecca consider whether Michael was really the one. She brought up concerns about his financial stability, even though Michael made a great living and had never asked Rebecca or her mother for a dime. She even hired a private investigator to dig into his background, which Rebecca only found out about when the investigator accidentally called her phone instead of Patricia's. Rebecca confronted her mother in her office downtown. It was the first time she'd ever truly yelled at Patricia. She demanded to know what was going on, why she was trying to sabotage the wedding, why she couldn't just be happy for her only daughter. Patricia's response was cold and calculated. She told Rebecca she was just protecting her, that she'd worked too hard to build their life for Rebecca to throw it away on someone who might not be who he seemed. Rebecca left that office in tears, feeling more confused than ever. But she didn't call off the wedding. She loved Michael, and despite everything, she believed her mother would come around. She had to. 1 week before the wedding, Michael received an unmarked envelope at his apartment. Inside was a single piece of paper, a photocopy of a birth certificate, his birth certificate. But something was off. The names listed as his parents weren't the ones he'd been told about his whole life. He stared at that document for hours, his hands shaking, his mind racing. He called his Aunt Linda, demanding answers. The conversation that followed would change everything. Linda broke down on the phone, told him the truth she'd been hiding for 29 years. Michael wasn't their nephew by blood. He'd been adopted through a private agency when he was 3 days old. His biological mother had given him up and disappeared. His aunt and uncle had promised never to tell him, to let him believe he was truly theirs. Michael felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. Everything he thought he knew about himself was a lie. But the question burning in his mind was simple. Who sent him that birth certificate? And why now? Michael didn't tell Rebecca about the birth certificate right away. He needed time to process it himself. But he started digging. He contacted the adoption agency listed on the paperwork, but they'd closed down 15 years ago. He searched online for any records, any trace of his biological mother. The name on the birth certificate was Patricia Ann Morrison. That name meant nothing to him. Or so he thought. The night before the wedding, Michael couldn't sleep. He sat in his hotel room, staring at that birth certificate, and something clicked in his brain. Patricia Ann Morrison. Patricia Ann. His fiancée's mother's name was Patricia Ann Caldwell. Caldwell was her married name. She'd been married briefly in her early 20s, divorced, and kept the name for business. But what was her maiden name? Michael grabbed his laptop and started searching. Public records, social media, anything he could find. And then he found it. An old newspaper article from 1991. A small piece about a local high school student who'd won a debate competition. Patricia Ann Morrison. The photo was grainy, but it was unmistakably her. Younger, different hair, but the same sharp eyes, the same thin lips. Michael felt like he was going to be sick. He needed to know for sure. He needed proof. He drove to Patricia's house at 2 a.m. Her car was in the driveway. The lights were off. He sat outside for an hour, trying to decide what to do. Finally, he called her. She answered on the 5th ring, her voice groggy and annoyed. He told her he needed to talk to her immediately. She hung up. Michael sat in his car, his heart pounding, and made a decision. He would confront her tomorrow. At the wedding, in front of everyone. Because if what he suspected was true, Patricia didn't deserve to hide anymore. The morning of May 14th, 2023, dawned bright and clear. The kind of perfect spring day that makes you believe in new beginnings. Rebecca woke up in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by her bridesmaids, feeling a mix of excitement and anxiety she couldn't quite name. Her mother had been quiet all morning. Too quiet. Patricia helped Rebecca into her dress, a stunning ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves, and for a moment, everything felt right. Patricia's hands were gentle as she fastened the buttons. Her eyes were soft. She even smiled. But then, as Rebecca stood in front of the mirror, taking in her reflection, Patricia said something that made her blood run cold. She said, "Rebecca, if you want to call this off, we can, right now. We'll refund the venue, send everyone home, and no one will judge you." Rebecca turned around, confused and hurt. Why would she say that? Today of all days? Patricia's face was pale, her hands trembling. She said, "Because some things are more important than weddings. Some secrets are too big to ignore." Rebecca demanded to know what she was talking about, but Patricia just shook her head and left the room. Meanwhile, Michael was getting ready with his groomsmen at the hotel. His best friend James asked if he was okay, if he was having cold feet. Michael said no. He loved Rebecca more than anything. But there was something he needed to take care of, something that couldn't wait. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Rebecca walked down the aisle on her own, since her father had passed away years ago. Michael stood at the altar, watching her approach, and despite everything swirling in his mind, he felt that surge of love and certainty. They exchanged vows. They exchanged rings. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Everyone cheered, but Michael barely heard any of it, because standing in the front row, Patricia was crying, not tears of joy, tears of something else entirely, guilt, fear, regret. The reception was held in a grand ballroom at a historic plantation venue just outside Charleston. Crystal chandeliers, white roses everywhere, a live band playing jazz standards. It was elegant and expensive, and everything Patricia had planned down to the last detail. The first hour went smoothly. Dinner was served, toasts were made. Rebecca's maid of honor told funny stories about their college days. Michael's best man talked about what a stand-up guy he was. Everyone laughed. Everyone drank. Everyone seemed happy, but Michael was watching Patricia. She sat at the head table, barely touching her food, her eyes darting around the room, like she was waiting for something terrible to happen. And then came the mother-daughter dance. Traditionally, the bride dances with her father, but since Rebecca's father had passed, she'd asked her mother to dance with her instead. The band started playing a slow song. Rebecca and Patricia stepped onto the dance floor. Everyone watched, smiling, taking photos. Patricia held her daughter close, and for a moment, she looked like she might break down completely. He walked across the dance floor, his footsteps echoing on the polished wood. People started to notice. The music kept playing, but conversations stopped. Heads turned. Michael stopped right next to them and said, "Patricia, we need to talk. Right now." Patricia's face went white. Rebecca looked confused. She said, "Michael, what are you doing? Can this wait?" He said, "No, it can't." Patricia tried to pull away, but Michael grabbed her arm, not hard, just firm enough to keep her from leaving. He said, tell her the truth." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Please, not here, not now." Michael's voice was louder now. "Tell her who you are. Tell her what you did." Rebecca was panicking now, looking between them. She said, "Michael, you're scaring me. What's going on?" And that's when Patricia said it, her voice barely a whisper, but in the silence of that ballroom, everyone heard it. "You just married your half-brother." The ballroom erupted. Gasps. Screams. Someone dropped a glass, and it shattered on the floor. The band stopped playing mid-note. Rebecca stumbled backward, her face drained of all color. She looked at Michael, then at her mother, then back at Michael. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Michael stood frozen, his worst fear confirmed. Patricia collapsed into a chair, sobbing into her hands. People started talking all at once. Some rushed toward Rebecca, others pulled out their phones. The videographer kept recording, capturing every horrible second. Rebecca finally found her voice. She screamed, "What?" The word came out raw and broken. She turned to her mother and screamed again. "What did you just say?" Patricia couldn't even look at her. She just kept crying, kept saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Michael tried to reach for Rebecca, but she jerked away from him like his touch burned. Her bridesmaids surrounded her, trying to calm her down, but she pushed them away. She looked at Michael with so much pain in her eyes it physically hurt him. She said, "Did you know? Did you know before today?" Michael shook his head. He said, "I swear I was going to tell you." But Rebecca wasn't listening anymore. She turned to her mother and said, "How could you? How could you let this happen? How could you watch me fall in love with him, plan a wedding with him, marry him, and not say a single word?" Patricia finally looked up, her face streaked with mascara. She said, "I didn't know it was him. Not at first. But when I met him, when I heard his name, his birthday, where he was from, I started to suspect. And then I hired that investigator and I found out for sure." Rebecca's voice was ice. "When? When did you know?" Patricia hesitated, then said, 3 months ago." Patricia had known for 3 entire months that her daughter was about to marry her own biological half-brother, and she'd said nothing. Rebecca let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. She ripped the veil off her head and threw it on the ground. Then she ran, just bolted out of the ballroom, her dress trailing behind her, leaving 200 stunned guests and a mother who'd destroyed everything. Michael stood there, his entire world crumbling around him. He looked at Patricia, and something inside him snapped. All the confusion, all the pain, all the lies, it all came crashing down at once. He walked toward her slowly. Patricia stood up, backing away, but there was nowhere to go. She said, "Michael, please. I'm sorry. I was young. I was scared. I didn't know what else to do." Michael's voice was shaking. "You had 3 months. 3 months to tell us, to stop this, to do the right thing. And you said nothing." Patricia was crying harder now. "I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought maybe the test was wrong. I couldn't ruin her happiness." Michael said, "So instead, you let her marry her brother? You let us make vows to each other? You let this become a nightmare we can never wake up from?" And then, in a moment of pure, uncontrolled rage and heartbreak, Michael's hand flew up and connected with Patricia's cheek. The slap echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Patricia stumbled sideways, clutching her face. Women screamed. Men rushed forward. Michael's best friend grabbed him, pulling him back. Someone yelled to call the police. Patricia stood there, her hand on her reddening cheek, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. No explanations. No excuses. No way to fix what she'd broken. Michael was escorted out by his groomsmen. Patricia was surrounded by guests trying to help her. And somewhere outside, Rebecca sat alone on the ground in her wedding dress, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Multiple guests had called them. Some reported an assault, others reported a disturbance. One officer later said it was the strangest call he'd ever responded to. When they arrived, they found a wedding reception in complete chaos. Half the guests had left. The other half were standing around in clusters, whispering, staring at their phones. Patricia was sitting in a chair with ice on her face, surrounded by friends. Michael was outside in the parking lot with his groomsmen, pacing back and forth. Rebecca was in a back room with her bridesmaids, completely unreachable. The officers separated everyone and started taking statements. Patricia, through her tears, told them that Michael had assaulted her, slapped her in front of everyone. She showed them the mark on her face. She pressed charges. Michael didn't deny it. He told the officers exactly what happened. The birth certificate. The truth. The 3 months of lies. He said he wasn't proud of what he did, but he wanted them to understand why. The officers looked at each other. One of them said, "This is way above our pay grade." Michael was arrested, handcuffed, read his rights. Walked out to a police car while guests watched from windows and doorways. Photos were taken, videos were recorded. And within hours, the story was everywhere. Local news picked it up first. Groom arrested after slapping mother-in-law at wedding reception, but then someone leaked the real story. The adoption. The secret. The fact that a bride and groom had just discovered they were biological siblings. National outlets grabbed it. Social media exploded. By the next morning, the story was trending on every platform. People took sides. Some said Michael was justified. Others said violence is never the answer. Some blamed Patricia for being a monster. Others said she was a victim too. Everyone had an opinion. But nobody had solutions. Because how do you solve something like this? How do you undo a marriage between siblings? How do you heal from a betrayal this deep? Rebecca didn't leave that back room for hours. Her bridesmaids stayed with her, but she barely acknowledged them. She just sat on the floor in her wedding dress, staring at nothing, her mind trying to process what couldn't be processed. The man she loved was her brother. The mother she trusted had lied to her for months. The wedding she'd dreamed about her whole life was now a crime scene. At some point, her maid of honor convinced her to change out of the dress. Rebecca stood there like a mannequin while her friends carefully unbuttoned it. She put on jeans and a t-shirt someone had grabbed from her hotel room. She looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. One of her bridesmaids asked if she wanted to talk to Michael. Rebecca said no. Another asked if she wanted to talk to her mother. Rebecca said absolutely not. Around midnight, Rebecca finally left the venue. She refused to go home. She refused to go to the hotel. She ended up at her friend Sarah's apartment, where she collapsed on the couch and didn't move for 2 days. She didn't eat, barely drank water, didn't answer calls or texts. Her phone had over 300 messages, from friends, from family, from reporters. Sarah later told investigators that Rebecca would just stare at the ceiling and occasionally say things like, "How did this happen?" or "I can't be married to him," or "I want to disappear." On the 3rd day, Rebecca finally spoke in full sentences. She asked Sarah to help her figure out what to do legally. Could the marriage be annulled? Yes. Would there be legal consequences for Patricia? Maybe. For Michael? He was already facing assault charges. For her? No. She was a victim in all of this. A woman named Jennifer who specialized in family law and had seen some unusual cases, though never anything quite like this. Jennifer laid out Rebecca's options. The marriage could be annulled immediately on the grounds of incest, even though neither of them had known. Patricia could potentially face charges for fraud or emotional distress, though that would be harder to prove. Michael's assault charge was separate and would go through the criminal system. Rebecca listened to all of it with a blank expression. Then she asked the only question that really mattered to her. "Can I ever see him again?" Jennifer said. "Legally, yes. You're adults. But Rebecca, you need to understand what this means. You're biologically related. You're siblings. Even if you wanted to stay together, society, the law, and basic biology say you can't." Rebecca nodded slowly. Then she said, "I know, but I still love him." "How do I make that stop?" Michael spent the night in jail. He was released the next morning on bail, paid for by his uncle Robert, who'd driven up from Savannah as soon as he heard what happened. Robert picked Michael up from the station, and they sat in the car in silence for a long time. Finally, Robert said, "Your aunt and I should have told you. "We thought we were protecting you," Michael said. "From what? From knowing I had a biological mother out there who didn't want me? From knowing that your biological mother was a scared teenager who made an impossible choice. Michael, she was 17, barely older than a kid herself. She gave you up so you could have a better life." Michael wanted to be angry, but he was just tired. He said, "And now that better life is destroyed." They drove to Robert and Linda's house. Linda was waiting on the porch, her face swollen from crying. She hugged Michael so tight he could barely breathe. She said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. We should have told you." Michael stayed with them for a week. During that time, he tried to piece together what his life looked like now. He'd married his half-sister. He'd assaulted her mother, his biological mother. He was facing criminal charges. His job had put him on administrative leave pending investigation. The media had turned him into a national spectacle, and the woman he loved more than anything in the world couldn't even look at him. He thought about Rebecca constantly, wondered if she was okay, wondered if she hated him, wondered if there was any way to salvage anything from this disaster. His lawyer told him not to contact her. It could complicate things. But Michael couldn't help it. He sent her one text, just one. It said, "I'm sorry. I love you. I don't know how to fix this." Rebecca read it, but she didn't respond. Patricia became a pariah overnight. Her friends stopped calling. Her business partners distanced themselves. She received hundreds of hateful messages online. People showed up at her office to yell at her. One person threw a drink at her in a restaurant. She deserved all of it. She knew she did, but knowing that didn't make it easier. A week after the wedding, Patricia's lawyer advised her to drop the assault charges against Michael. The public sympathy was entirely against her. If this went to trial, she would be destroyed on the stand. She would have to explain why she'd hidden the truth, why she'd let the wedding happen, and no jury in the world would side with her. Patricia agreed to drop the charges. But she needed to do something else first. She needed to explain. She reached out to a local journalist, someone she'd known for years, and agreed to an interview. The journalist, a woman named Karen, met her at Patricia's home. Patricia looked like she'd aged 10 years in a week. She sat across from Karen and told her everything. She said, "I was 17 years old. I got pregnant by a boy I thought I loved. He left the second I told him. My parents kicked me out. I had nowhere to go. I stayed with a friend until I started showing, and then I moved into a shelter for pregnant teens. I gave birth on March 9th, 1991. They put the baby in my arms, and I held him for maybe 5 minutes. And then I signed the papers and walked away, because I knew I couldn't give him the life he deserved." Karen asked, "Did you ever try to find him?" Patricia nodded. She said, "When Rebecca was born, I thought about him constantly. I wondered if he was okay, if he was happy, if he thought about me. But I never looked for him because I was afraid of what I'd find. And then, 29 years later, my daughter brings home this man. This kind, wonderful man. And she's so happy. And I'm happy for her. Until I hear his birthday, and his hometown, and something in my gut tells me to check. So I hired an investigator. And the investigator came back with proof. A DNA comparison using a sample from a coffee cup Michael had used at my house. He was my son." Karen asked the question everyone wanted to know. "Why didn't you tell them?" Patricia's voice cracked. "Because I'm a coward. Because I convinced myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe the test was wrong. Maybe if I just ignored it, it would go away. And by the time I couldn't ignore it anymore, they were already so deep into wedding planning. I thought maybe I could stop it subtly, but Rebecca wouldn't listen, and I didn't have the courage to just tell her the truth." The interview aired 2 days later. It didn't make people forgive Patricia, but it made them understand, slightly. The comments online shifted from pure hatred to a more complex mix of anger, pity, and sadness. But none of that mattered to Rebecca, because understanding why her mother did it didn't change what had been done. 3 weeks after the wedding, Rebecca and Michael met, in a lawyer's office, to sign annulment papers. It was the first time they'd seen each other since that day. Rebecca walked in first, flanked by her lawyer and her friend Sarah. She looked thin, tired. Her eyes were red. Michael arrived a few minutes later with his lawyer. When their eyes met, the pain was mutual and suffocating. They sat on opposite sides of a conference table. The lawyers did most of the talking. The annulment was straightforward. Grounds: incest. Even though neither party had known, the marriage was void from the start. No contest, no arguments, just signatures. The lawyers slid the papers across the table. Michael signed first. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. Then Rebecca signed. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything. She just signed her name and pushed the papers back. The lawyers said they'd file everything with the court. It would be finalized within a week. Michael said her name. Just Rebecca. She stopped but didn't turn around. He said, "I'm sorry for all of it. I wish I could go back and change it." Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. She said, "Me too," and then she left. Michael sat there for a long time after she was gone. His lawyer asked if he was okay. Michael said, "No. I don't think I'll ever be okay again." 6 months after the wedding that never should have happened, life had moved on for some people. For others, it never would. Michael moved out of Charleston. He couldn't stay in a city where everyone knew his story. He took a job in Denver and started over. New city, new people, new life. He went to therapy twice a week. He was learning to forgive himself, though some days that felt impossible. He still thought about Rebecca every single day. Patricia sold her real estate business and moved to Florida. She couldn't handle the stares and the whispers anymore. She tried to reach out to Rebecca several times, but Rebecca never responded. Patricia wrote her letters. Long, detailed letters, explaining everything, apologizing, begging for a chance to make things right. She never got a response. She probably never would. She quit her job at the hospital because she couldn't handle the questions and the pity. She started working at a small clinic in a different part of the city where nobody knew who she was. She cut her hair short, stopped wearing makeup, tried to become invisible. Her friends checked on her constantly. She appreciated it, but she also resented it. She didn't want to be the girl whose wedding became a national scandal. She didn't want to be defined by the worst day of her life. But she didn't know how to be anything else. She went to therapy, too. Her therapist asked her once if she still loved Michael. Rebecca said, "I don't know how to stop." "You're allowed to grieve what you lost," Rebecca said. "But what did I lose? A marriage that was never real? A relationship with my brother? A mother I can't forgive?" The therapist said, "You lost the future you'd imagined, and that's worth grieving." One day, Rebecca ran into someone who'd been at the wedding, a woman she barely knew. The woman said, "I just want you to know. I think about you all the time. What you went through, how strong you are." Rebecca smiled politely and said, "Thank you." But inside, she wanted to scream, because she wasn't strong. She was barely surviving. She was held together by routine and sheer willpower and the hope that someday this pain would hurt a little less. Michael sent her one more message. 6 months to the day after the wedding, it said, "I hope you're okay. I hope you're finding peace. I'll always love you, even if I shouldn't." Rebecca read it, sitting on her couch with a glass of wine. She cried for the first time in weeks, and then she typed a response. It said, "I love you too. But I can't do this. Goodbye, Michael." She hit send, deleted his number, and tried to move forward. So where does that leave us? With a story that has no happy ending, No villain you can simply hate. No hero you can fully root for. Just real people making impossible choices and living with the consequences. Patricia made a choice at 17 that she thought was right. And then she made a choice at 50 that was unforgivably wrong. Michael made a choice in a moment of rage that he'll regret forever. Rebecca had no choice in any of it. She was just a woman who fell in love with the wrong person through no fault of her own. The question everyone asks is, who's to blame? Is it Patricia for giving Michael up? For not telling the truth? Is it Michael for not controlling his anger? Is it the adoption system for sealing records? Is it fate? God? Bad luck? The truth is, blame doesn't matter, because no amount of blame changes what happened. No amount of anger undoes that wedding day. This story asks us to think about secrets, about the weight they carry, about the damage they cause when they finally come to light. It asks us to think about what we would do in Patricia's position. Would you tell your daughter she's about to marry her brother? Would you find the courage to destroy her happiness to save her from something worse? It asks us to think about what we would do in Michael's position. Would you stay calm when the woman who abandoned you let you marry your sister? Or would you break? And it asks us to think about Rebecca, about how you rebuild a life after something like this, how you trust again, how you love again, how you even get out of bed in the morning. I want you to ask yourself something. If you were Rebecca, could you forgive your mother? Could you forgive Michael? Could you forgive yourself for not seeing the signs? And if you were watching this unfold at that wedding, what would you have done? Would you have intervened? Called the police? Stayed silent? These are questions without easy answers, but they're worth thinking about. Because stories like this remind us that life is complicated, that people are complicated, that sometimes there are no good choices, only choices, and we all have to live with the ones we make. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, let us know in the comments. How would you have handled this situation? Do you think Patricia deserves forgiveness? Do you think Michael and Rebecca could ever have a relationship as siblings? And have you ever had to make an impossible choice? We read every comment. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you made it this far, thank you for staying with us through this difficult, heartbreaking, complicated story. Because there are more stories out there. More real people facing impossible situations. And we're going to keep telling them. Until next time.